She sat in that waiting room for 6 hours. 6 hours. With a chart number taped to her wrist like she was inventory, like she was something to be processed, filed, handled when they got around to it. And nobody, not one person behind that desk, stopped to really look at her. That's the part that stays with me. Not what they said, not even what they did. It's what they chose not to see, because if they had looked, really looked, they would have noticed the way she held herself even when the pain was climbing her spine, the way her eyes moved across that room like someone who had memorized every corner of every hospital room she'd ever walked into, the way her hands stayed still in her lap, even then, especially then, but they didn't look. They saw a black woman in her 60s, natural silver locks pulled back, wearing a plain coat, no jewelry, no performance, and they decided her. In the space of half a second, the way people decide things they don't even know they're deciding, they decided she could wait. What happens next in this story is going to make you set your phone down and then pick it right back up, because you'll need to see it through to the end. Her name was Dr. Elaine Moseley. And before we go any further, I need you to understand something about this woman. Not what she accomplished, not the degrees on the wall or the title in front of her name. I need you to understand who she was before all of that, because that's where this story actually begins. Elaine grew up in Memphis, Tennessee, 3rd Ward, a neighborhood where the grocery store closed before she turned 12, and the nearest hospital was 40 minutes by bus. If the bus was running, which it often wasn't, her mother worked nights at a laundry service, and her grandmother, Miss Cora, for whom she was named, raised her on black-eyed peas, strong coffee, and the kind of quiet discipline that doesn't announce itself. It just holds. Miss Cora used to say, "Baby, you don't have to be loud to be unmovable." Elaine never forgot that. She was the first in her family to finish high school without interruption, the first to go to college, the first to walk into a medical school building, and not as a patient, not as a janitor, not as someone's assistant, but as a student, a doctor in the making. Do you know what that costs? Not the tuition. Forget the tuition. I mean the other price, the one nobody puts on a scholarship application. The price of being the only one in the room who looks like you. The price of having a professor call on you last every single time, as if your hand wasn't already raised. The price of your competence being treated like a surprise every single day. Elaine paid that price for 31 years. She graduated from Meharry Medical College in 1987. Meharry, one of the oldest historically black medical schools in the country, a place that has quietly trained more black doctors than almost any institution in American history. She did her residency at Vanderbilt, her fellowship in internal medicine at Johns Hopkins, and then, when she could have gone anywhere, and she had offers, real ones, she came back. She came back to the Mid-South, to the communities that raised her, to the patients who looked like her grandmother. By 2003, she was the director of internal medicine at Crestwood Regional Medical Center in Nashville. By 2011, she had built one of the most respected teaching programs in the state. The residents who trained under her, the young doctors who came through her department wide-eyed and terrified and brilliant, they called her Dr. Mo, not behind her back, to her face, with the kind of affection that is also respect, the kind that is hard to earn and impossible to fake. Half the floor that would ignore her on that Tuesday morning in January, half of them had sat in her classroom, had fumbled through their first patient assessment while she stood beside them, quiet and steady, correcting without humiliating. She had trained them. She had poured herself into them. And on the morning this story takes place, she walked into the emergency department of a hospital 15 minutes from her own because she was having chest tightening, radiating discomfort in her left arm, and shortness of breath that she knew, with everything in her training, was not nothing. She walked in at 8:47 in the morning. She checked in at the front desk. She told the intake nurse, a young woman named Danny, 24, 2 years out of nursing school, she told her clearly, calmly, without drama, "I'm having chest discomfort, left arm involvement, and I need to be seen." Danny typed something, handed her a bracelet, pointed at the chairs. "We'll call you when we're ready." Elaine sat down. She waited. At the 40-minute mark, she approached the desk again, quietly, spine straight, chin level, the way Miss Cora taught her. "I want to make sure my symptoms were documented accurately. Chest discomfort with radiation to the left arm can indicate..." "Ma'am." Danny didn't look up from her screen. "We have a lot of patients today. You'll be called." Elaine went back to her seat. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, the way she always did when she was thinking hard about something. And what she was thinking, what she would tell her daughter about later in a phone call that would last 2 hours, was this: "I know what this feeling is, and I know what it means, and I am sitting here being asked to wait for someone to believe me." That thought alone, that particular wait, is something that does not belong to Elaine only. If you've ever sat in a room and had your pain treated like an inconvenience, you know exactly what she was feeling in that moment. Exactly. By the second hour, the waiting room had shifted. New faces. A man with a towel wrapped around his hand, bleeding, visibly. He was seen within 20 minutes. A college-aged woman with her boyfriend, crying softly, holding her stomach. 40 minutes, and she was called back. A teenager with his mother, in and out in under an hour. Elaine watched all of it. She wasn't counting out of bitterness. She was counting the way doctors count, the way you learn to read a room when a room is your office, when the difference between what you observe and what you miss can determine whether someone goes home or doesn't. She noticed things. She noticed that the intake nurse, Danny, greeted some patients with her full attention and others with the top half of her face. She noticed that the charge nurse, a heavy-set man named Gerald, mid-40s, moving through the floor with the confidence of someone who had been doing this long enough to stop questioning himself. She noticed that Gerald made eye contact with almost everyone who passed his station. Almost. She went to the desk a second time at the 2-hour mark. This time she asked to speak with the charge nurse directly. Gerald came over with the expression of a man who has decided before he arrives that whatever he's about to hear is going to be a complaint he's already familiar with. That particular tiredness around the eyes, that preemptive patience that is not really patience at all. It's management. It's containment. "What can I do for you, ma'am?" "I checked in 2 hours ago with chest discomfort and left arm radiation. I want to make sure that's been flagged as potentially cardiac in origin. Those symptoms together in a woman my age warrant..." "Ma'am, I understand you're uncomfortable." He said the word uncomfortable the way people say it when they mean something smaller than what you said. "We're triaging based on severity. You've been assessed." "I haven't been assessed. I was given a bracelet and directed to a chair." "The intake nurse documented your symptoms." Then I'd like to know what triage category I was assigned. A pause, brief, but the kind of pause that tells you everything. You're in a non-urgent category, ma'am. If your symptoms worsen, Gerald, she said his name, quietly, just his name. Chest discomfort with left arm radiation in a 63-year-old woman is not non-urgent. It is, by every clinical guideline this hospital operates under, a Category 2 presentation minimum. Gerald looked at her for a moment, really looked, maybe for the first time, and then something behind his eyes made a small, almost imperceptible decision. I'll have someone check on you shortly. He walked away. Nobody came for 47 minutes. And here is where I want to pause, because I need you to stay with this part. I need you to not rush past it, because what Elaine was experiencing in that waiting room is not an unusual story. That's the part that should stop you cold. Studies have documented it. Researchers have measured it. Black women's pain, specifically, distinctly, measurably, is undertreated in American emergency medicine. There is a name for it in the literature. There are papers written about it in journals that the people working that floor had theoretically read during their training. The people who had potentially read those very papers, some of them trained by Elaine herself, were 40 feet away behind a set of double doors, and she was still in the chair. By hour 3, the discomfort had changed character. It was still there, still present, but it had settled into something heavier, a pressure rather than a sharp sensation. She recognized the shift. She had described this shift to medical students more times than she could count. The way cardiac events can ebb and build, the way the body sends us signals in waves, the way those waves are easy to dismiss if you are not paying close attention. She was paying close attention. She was also, and this is the part her daughter would later cry about on the phone, she was also afraid. Not panicked. Elaine Moseley did not panic, but there is a specific kind of fear that belongs to the moment when you know something is wrong in your body and you cannot make anyone around you believe you. It is one of the loneliest feelings a human being can experience. It sits in the chest, sometimes literally, and it is quiet, and it is heavy, and it does not announce itself. She went to the desk a third time at hour 3 and 15 minutes. This time she did not ask. She stated, I need my symptoms reevaluated. The character of my chest discomfort has changed. I am a physician. I am telling you clinically, not emotionally, that what I am experiencing warrants immediate assessment. Danny looked up from her screen fully for the first time. Ma'am, are you saying you're a doctor? I am saying my symptoms have progressed. Okay, I'll let Gerald know. Please do. She walked back to her seat, sat down, hands folded in her lap, spine straight, and she waited. Because that's what they had reduced her to, a woman who knew exactly what was happening inside her own body, sitting in a plastic chair, waiting for someone with less knowledge and less experience and less at stake to decide she was worth their attention. That moment, right there, is where everything in this story begins to turn. Because what none of them knew, not Danny, not Gerald, not the attending physician who had glanced at her triage file once and moved on. What none of them knew was that Elaine had not come into that hospital alone. Not really. She had 31 years walking in behind her, and they were about to make themselves known. At hour 4, something happened that changed the temperature of the entire floor. Not dramatically, not with noise or confrontation, the way real turning points usually arrive, quietly through a side door, almost like they weren't trying to be noticed. A young resident came through the double doors into the waiting area. His name was Dr. Marcus Webb, 29 years old, third-year internal medicine resident. He was moving fast, the way residents always move, that particular combination of exhaustion and urgency that becomes a kind of permanent posture after the first year. He had a chart in his hand, and he was scanning the room for a patient name. His eyes passed over the waiting area, and then they stopped. He stood completely still for a moment that lasted maybe 3 seconds but felt much longer to anyone watching. Then he walked directly, without hesitation, across the waiting room floor. "Dr. Mo?" Elaine looked up. Marcus Webb had sat in her classroom for 2 years. He had fumbled through his first patient workup under her supervision in 2019. She had caught an error in his differential diagnosis on a case that could have cost a patient significantly. Caught it quietly, corrected it privately, never once made him feel small about it. He had never forgotten that. He had told that story at his residency graduation dinner. "Marcus?" Her voice was steady, warm, even, the way it always was. He looked at her wrist, the bracelet, the waiting room chair, the coat she'd been sitting in for 4 hours. "How long have you been here?" "A while." "Dr. Mo?" He said it again, and this time the 2 words carried the full weight of what he was understanding. "What are your symptoms?" She told him, clinically, precisely, the way she had taught him to present a case. No unnecessary words, no emotional framing, just the facts in the order that mattered. Chest discomfort, onset approximately 5 hours prior. Radiation to the left arm, primarily the inner aspect. Shortness of breath, mild but present. Character of discomfort had shifted from sharp to pressure-like at approximately the 3-hour mark. No diaphoresis, no nausea, history of hypertension, managed. No prior cardiac events. Marcus listened with the full attention she had taught him to give every patient, and then he turned, not rudely, not dramatically. He simply turned and walked with speed back through those double doors. What happened on the other side of those doors in the next 4 minutes, Elaine would only learn about later in pieces from people who had been there. Marcus went directly to the attending physician on duty, a man named Dr. Robert Callahan, 51 years old, 17 years of emergency medicine, a man who prided himself genuinely on running a tight floor, a competent doctor, a man who had also 4 hours ago glanced at a triage file marked non-urgent and moved on. Marcus said, "The woman in seat 14 of the waiting room. I need you to pull her file right now." Callahan looked at him. "Webb, I'm in the middle of—" "Dr. Callahan." Marcus said it the way Elaine had taught him to speak when something mattered, without apology, without aggression, just with the full weight of what he knew. "Her name is Dr. Elaine Moseley. She is the former director of internal medicine at Crestwood Regional. She trained me. She trained half this floor, and she has been sitting in that waiting room for 4 hours with a presentation that I am telling you is cardiac until proven otherwise." The hallway went quiet. Not literally. The monitors still beeped. The intercom still called codes. But in the small space between those two men, something went very still. Callahan pulled the file. He read it. He read it again. And then he set it down on the counter with the particular care of a man who is beginning to understand the size of what has happened on his floor. She's been here since 8:47? Yes. And nobody... no. Callahan was already moving. He came through those double doors himself, not a nurse, not a resident, the attending physician, and he crossed the waiting room and he crouched down to eye level with Elaine Moseley in that plastic chair, and he said, "Dr. Moseley, I am so sorry. We're taking you back right now." Elaine looked at him. She didn't say anything immediately. She simply stood, the way she always stood, slowly, with intention, without performance, picked up her bag, and walked with him through those doors. The waiting room watched her go. And I want you to sit with what just happened there, because there are two ways to hear this moment, and they are both true, and they are both important. The first truth, a young man who had been taught to see people, really see them, saw her, and he acted immediately, without hesitation, the way she had trained him to act when something mattered. The second truth, it took someone recognizing her credentials, her title, her history, her name, to move that floor into action. Not her pain, not her words, not her 4 hours of waiting, her name. Sit with that for a moment. Because Elaine was sitting with it in the back of a hospital that should have been treating her from minute one, while they attached the EKG leads to her chest and the machine began printing out the truth that her body had been trying to communicate all morning. The results came back in the 11 minutes. And when Callahan read them, he set the paper down with that same careful deliberateness, the kind a person uses when they need a moment before they speak. Elaine watched his face. She had read that particular expression on a doctor's face before. She had worn it herself more times than she could count. It was the expression of someone holding information that is serious but manageable if you had caught it when you should have. "Dr. Moseley," Callahan said, "we're looking at significant indicators here. We're moving you to a cardiac monitoring room immediately, and I'm calling the cardiology team now." Elaine nodded once. "I know," she said quietly. She had known since 8:47 that morning. That was the part, that small, devastating detail, that would stay with everyone who heard this story long after the details faded. She had known, and for 6 hours, the room full of people trained to listen had chosen not to hear her. The cardiology team arrived in 8 minutes. That is worth noting, 8 minutes, because 4 hours earlier, the same hallways, the same elevators, the same institutional machinery that had just taken 8 minutes to assemble a full cardiac response team, that same system had decided Elaine Moseley could wait in a plastic chair. The speed of the response now was not lost on her. She noticed it the way she noticed everything, quietly, filed it away. The cardiologist on call was a woman named Dr. Patricia Huang, 44 years old, sharp, precise, the kind of doctor who reads a room and a chart with equal attention. She came in, introduced herself, reviewed the EKG results, and began the examination with the focused efficiency of someone who understood what they were looking at. She also, and Elaine would remember this specifically, she also pulled a chair to the bedside and sat down. at eye level, the way you sit when you are not in a hurry to leave, the way Elaine had taught her residents to sit when the conversation mattered. "Dr. Moseley," Patricia said, "I've read your file. I want to be transparent with you about what we're seeing and what we're going to do about it. Please. You've had what we believe is a cardiac event. The EKG shows changes consistent with unstable angina moving toward something more serious. The fact that it's been 6 hours since symptom onset." She paused, just briefly. "We need to move quickly, but we caught it." "You're going to be all right." Elaine closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds where 63 years of holding herself together were allowed, privately, to exhale. Then she opened them. "What's the plan?" Patricia told her. Clearly, completely, without talking down to her, the way you speak to a colleague who also happens to be your patient. The way that kind of respect, when it finally arrives, feels both like relief and like a reminder of everything that preceded it. While the cardiology team worked, something else was happening on the other side of those doors. Word had moved through that floor the way word moves through any enclosed professional community, fast, low, and with the particular electric charge of information that everyone senses will have consequences. By the time Elaine was settled in the cardiac monitoring room, the nursing station was quiet in a way that working floors are not usually quiet. People were at their stations, doing their jobs, but there was a stillness underneath the motion. The stillness of people thinking very carefully about what had happened on their watch. Gerald, the charge nurse, had pulled Elaine's intake file and read it 3 times. Danny, the intake nurse, had gone to the staff bathroom for 10 minutes and come back with her jaw set in the particular way of someone who has looked at something about themselves they didn't enjoy seeing. Dr. Callahan had called the department administrator, not because he was required to, because he understood that what had happened on his floor that morning was not a paperwork issue. It was not a protocol gap. It was not a training deficiency that could be addressed with a memo. It was something older and harder than any of that. And it had happened inside a system he was responsible for on a morning he had been present for, to a woman who had spent 3 decades building that system from the inside. He made the call anyway, because some things you don't wait to be told to do. Now, I want to tell you about Marcus Webb for a moment, because his part in this story is important in a way that goes beyond what he did in that hallway. Marcus had gone back to his rounds after Elaine was taken in. He did his job. He finished his shift. But that evening, sitting in the residence lounge with a cup of cold coffee he'd forgotten to drink, he wrote something down, not for anyone else, just for himself. The way Elaine had taught them all to reflect, to actually sit with what happened in a day and ask yourself not just what you did, but what it meant. He wrote, "Today I walked into a waiting room and immediately recognized my mentor in a chair she should never have been sitting in for that long. The question I cannot stop asking is, what if I hadn't walked through that door?" That question, that specific, terrible, honest question, because here is the truth that nobody in that hospital wanted to say out loud, but that every single person on that floor was holding by the end of that day. If Marcus Webb had not come through those doors at that particular moment, if his path had taken him through a different exit to a different part of the building, Dr. Elaine Moseley might have sat in that chair for 2 more hours, with a cardiac event unfolding inside her chest, in a hospital, surrounded by people trained to treat exactly what she had. That is not a hypothetical designed to frighten you. That is simply what the timeline shows when you lay it flat and look at it without flinching. And Elaine knew it. She lay in that cardiac monitoring room, leads on her chest, the soft, persistent rhythm of the monitor beside her, and she thought about all the women who had sat in waiting rooms exactly like that one and had not had a Marcus Webb walk through the door, all the women who had been handed a bracelet and pointed at a chair and had gone home still hurting or had not gone home at all. She thought about her grandmother, Miss Cora, who died at 68 of a heart attack in a Memphis hospital after being told for 2 hours that her discomfort was probably anxiety. Miss Cora, who had raised Elaine on the understanding that you do not have to be loud to be unmovable. Miss Cora, who had never been loud a day in her life, who had sat in her own plastic chair, in her own waiting room, in her own city, and had been quiet and dignified and had waited to be believed and had not survived the wait. Elaine had become a doctor, in part because of that morning, because of that specific failure, because she had stood at 17 years old in a hospital corridor and understood, with the clarity that grief sometimes delivers, that the system that was supposed to protect her grandmother had looked at her grandmother and made a decision about who she was before it ever made a decision about what she needed. 31 years later, in a different hospital, in a different city, she was lying in a cardiac monitoring room because the same decision had been made about her. The monitor beeped steadily beside her. Her hands were folded on the blanket over her lap. Still, quiet, unmovable. And she was already thinking about what came next. Not for herself. She knew she was going to be all right. Patricia Huang had told her, and she believed it. She was thinking about what came next for the floor that had just spent 6 hours failing to see her. Because Elaine Cora Moseley had not spent 31 years inside this system without learning exactly how it worked. Every policy, every reporting structure, every lever of institutional accountability that existed within the architecture of American hospital administration. She knew where the doors were, and she was very, very good at opening them. She was admitted for 3 days, not because she was fragile, because the cardiac team was thorough, and Elaine, of all people, understood what thorough looked like and why it mattered. She submitted to every test with the patience of someone who had ordered those same tests on other people for decades and understood their value. She also used those 3 days, not loudly, not visibly, the way she used to prepare a case for grand rounds, methodically, without announcing herself, building something that would be impossible to dismiss when it finally stood up in the room. Her daughter, Renee, arrived the first evening, 36 years old, a healthcare attorney in Atlanta, natural hair pulled back, her mother's same stillness in the way she moved. She came through the door, took one look at Elaine in that hospital bed, and did something Elaine had not expected. She didn't cry. She sat down, pulled out her notebook, and said, "Tell me everything, from the beginning, every time, every name, every word." That was her daughter. That was what Elaine had raised. By the time Elaine was discharged on a Thursday morning, she had a documented account of every interaction from the moment she entered that emergency department. Every name, every time stamp, every exchange, reconstructed from memory with the precision of a physician who had been trained to observe and record. She had requested her intake file through proper channels. Her right as a patient, a right that nobody could deny her. She had reviewed the triage documentation and noted, with professional calm, the specific ways in which her self-reported symptoms had been minimized in the written record. The intake nurse had documented: patient reports chest discomfort, appears stable, non-urgent, appears stable. 2 words that had almost cost Elaine Moseley her life. 2 words that told you everything about what had been seen and what had been decided in the space of a 30-second interaction. Renee had photographed every document before they left the building. On the Monday following her discharge, Elaine made 3 phone calls. The first was to the chief medical officer of the hospital, a man named Dr. James Whitfield. She had met him twice at regional medical conferences. He knew her name, her work, her reputation. The call lasted 22 minutes. She spoke for most of it. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Elaine," he said finally, "I don't have words." "I'm not looking for words, James. I'm looking for action. And I want to talk about what that looks like." The second call was to the dean of the medical school affiliated with the hospital, the institution whose residents rotated through that very emergency department. Because what had happened on that floor was not only a patient safety issue, it was a training issue, it was an education issue, it was a question about what was being taught and what was being absorbed, and where the gap between the two was wide enough for a woman to fall through. The third call was to a journalist, a woman named Carol Simmons, who wrote on healthcare equity for a national publication. Elaine had been interviewed by her once, years before, on a piece about diversity in medical leadership. Carol picked up on the second ring. "Dr. Moseley, it's been a while." "It has. Carol, I have a story I think you need to hear, not as an advocate, as a patient." A pause. "I'm listening. Now here is where I want you to pay close attention, because what Elaine did next is the part of this story that is easy to misread if you're not looking carefully. She did not go to the press to burn the hospital down. She was not interested in spectacle. She was not interested in the particular kind of public outrage that flares hot and fades fast and changes nothing structural. She had watched that cycle too many times. She knew how it ended. What she wanted, what she had been thinking about from that cardiac monitoring room, hands folded on the blanket, the monitor steady beside her, was something harder to achieve and far more durable than a news cycle. She wanted the system to look at itself. She wanted the people on that floor, Danny, Gerald, Callahan, the attending who had glanced at her file and moved on. She wanted them to understand not just what they had done, but why they had done it. What assumptions had moved through them so quickly they hadn't even registered as decisions. What they had been taught implicitly about whose pain was urgent and whose could wait. She wanted that understanding to be uncomfortable enough to be unforgettable, and she was going to use every tool available to a 63-year-old black woman physician with 31 years of institutional knowledge and a daughter who happened to be a healthcare attorney. The meeting was scheduled for a Wednesday, 3 weeks after her discharge. The hospital's conference room on the 4th floor, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a courtyard, the kind of room designed to make institutional power feel calm and permanent. Elaine arrived 7 minutes early. She wore a deep navy suit. Her silver locks were down, not pulled back, down, a specific choice. The choice of a woman who had spent decades making herself smaller in professional spaces and had decided somewhere around day 2 in that cardiac monitoring room that she was finished with that particular accommodation. She carried a leather portfolio. Inside it, her patient file, the documented timeline Renee had helped her compile, a 14-page written account of her experience, and a proposal, a detailed, specific, actionable proposal for systemic change. Not a complaint, a proposal. That distinction mattered enormously to Elaine, and she would explain why. Dr. Whitfield was there, the hospital's legal team, the director of nursing, the head of the emergency department, a woman named Dr. Sandra Okafor, Nigerian-American, late 40s, who had arrived 12 minutes early and whose expression when Elaine walked in communicated something that was not quite guilt and not quite relief, but somewhere between the two. The recognition of someone who had been waiting for this conversation without knowing she was waiting for it. Marcus Webb was also there. He had been invited by Elaine specifically, not to testify, not to be questioned. She had called him the week before, his personal cell, which she had from his residency years. And she had said, "Marcus, I want you in that room because you are the example of what I'm going to argue is possible. I need you to see this conversation happen." He had said yes without hesitating. When everyone was seated, Elaine opened her portfolio. She did not begin with what had happened to her. She began with a case study. A 63-year-old black woman presents to an emergency department with chest discomfort and left arm radiation. She self-reports her symptoms clearly at intake. She is triaged as non-urgent. She waits 6 hours. Her symptoms progress. She is eventually seen following intervention by a resident who recognizes her. Cardiac event confirmed. Outcome survivable, but altered by the delay. She read it in the flat, precise register of a physician presenting a case at grand rounds. Then she looked up. The patient in that case study is me. And before we discuss accountability, I want to discuss something more important. I want to discuss what each person in this room believes, genuinely believes, about why it happened. The room was very still. Dr. Okafor was the first to speak. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it that had weight. "Dr. Moseley, I've been the head of this emergency department for 6 years, and I have read your account 3 times, and I want to say, before anything else is said in this room, I am sorry. Not institutionally, personally, because what you described should not happen to any patient. And the fact that it happens more often to patients who look like you, like us, is something I have not done enough to address. And I know that." Silence, real silence, the kind that means something landed. Elaine looked at her for a long moment. "Thank you, Sandra," she said. "That matters. Now let's talk about what we're going to do." What followed in that conference room lasted 4 hours, not 4 hours of argument, not 4 hours of legal positioning or institutional defensiveness, though Elaine had prepared for both and would have met them without blinking. 4 hours of the hardest kind of professional conversation, the kind where people are asked to look directly at something uncomfortable about themselves and their systems and stay in the room anyway. Elaine led it? Of course she did. She had spent 31 years leading rooms. She presented her proposal in 3 parts. The first was immediate. A mandatory implicit bias review for every staff member in the emergency department, not a checkbox training, not a 40-minute online module designed to be completed and forgotten. A structured, facilitated process developed in partnership with the hospital's existing diversity and equity office and 3 external consultants she had already identified and contacted. People who had done this work in clinical settings and understood the specific ways that bias operates inside medical decision-making. People who would not let the room off easy. The second part was structural, a revision of the triage protocol to include a mandatory secondary review for any patient over 55 presenting with chest-related symptoms, regardless of initial assessment. A small change on paper, an enormous change in practice. The kind of change that doesn't make headlines but saves lives on a Tuesday morning when nobody is watching. The third part was the one that made the legal team shift in their seats. Elaine proposed the creation of what she called a patient advocacy review board, an independent body with actual authority, not advisory capacity, to examine cases where patients had documented concerns about the quality or equity of their care, chaired by community members, not hospital administrators, reporting to the hospital board directly, not through the CMO's office. Real oversight, with real teeth. The legal team had questions. Of course they did. The language of institutional self-protection is fluent and fast, and Elaine had heard it in every register. She answered every question specifically, professionally, without impatience. And Renee, sitting 2 seats to her left, handled the legal dimensions with the quiet precision of someone who had been preparing for this particular conversation her entire career without knowing it. By the end of the 4 hours, 3 of the 5 proposals had been agreed to in principle, with implementation timelines attached. The other 2 were still in discussion. Elaine accepted that. Progress is not always total. She had learned that lesson across 3 decades of trying to move institutions that were designed at their foundation to resist movement. But those 3 agreements, signed, dated, with accountability structures attached, those were real. Those were going to change what happened to the next woman who walked through those doors with pain that someone decided could wait. Now, before I tell you how this story ends, if you are still here with me at this point in this story, I want to stop for just a moment and speak to you directly, because if you've made it this far, you are not a casual listener. You are someone this story found, someone it was already speaking to before you knew it, and I want to invite you, genuinely, not as a formality, to subscribe to this channel, to become part of this community. Because what we build here, story by story, is something specific. It is a space where Black women are not the background, not the lesson, not the before picture. They are the full, complicated, triumphant center of every single narrative we tell. If that matters to you, and I believe it does, or you would not still be here, then subscribe. Turn on the notification. Come back. We are here every week with a new story, and every one of them is built the way this one was built. With intention, with truth, with the respect this audience deserves. Now, there is one more thing about Elaine's story that I haven't told you yet. The part that happened 6 weeks after that conference room. The part that when her daughter called her to tell her made Elaine sit down slowly at her kitchen table in Memphis and put her hand flat on the wood and stay there for a long moment without speaking. Gerald, the charge nurse, had requested a private meeting with Dr. Okafor, not because he was required to, not as part of any disciplinary process, on his own, voluntarily. In that meeting, he said something that Dr. Okafor later shared with Elaine's permission. He said, "I've been doing this job for 19 years, and I have told myself the whole time that I treat every patient the same. I believed that about myself." Reading Dr. Moseley's account, her exact words, what she said to me and what I said back, I had to stop telling myself that story, and I don't know yet what to do with that. But I needed to say it out loud to someone. That is not a small thing. That is not nothing. That is a man in the middle of his life choosing to see something about himself that was easier not to see. Elaine, when she heard it, said, "That's where it starts, not with the policy, with that." Elaine went back to work 5 weeks after her discharge. First day back, she walked into her department at Crestwood Regional at 7:43 in the morning. Same coat, same leather bag, same silver locks down this time. A few of her residents were already there, the early ones, the ones who reminded her of herself at that age, burning with something they hadn't yet learned to pace. One of them, a young woman named Dr. Amara Price, 27 years old, first generation natural coils pulled up, caught sight of Elaine coming through the door and went very still for a moment. Then she walked over. She didn't say, "Welcome back." She didn't say, "We missed you." She said quietly, directly, the way Elaine had taught them all to speak when something mattered. "Dr. Mo, I read what happened to you. I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "How did you stay calm? 6 hours, knowing what you knew. How did you not—" She stopped, searching for the word. Elaine looked at her for a moment. "Come find me after rounds," she said. "We'll talk." After rounds, they sat in Elaine's office, the one with the window that faced the courtyard, the one with the framed photograph on the desk. Elaine and her grandmother, Miss Cora, taken in 1979 in the front yard of the house in Memphis. Elaine is 12. Miss Cora is 51. They are both looking directly at the camera with an expression that is not a smile exactly. It is something older than a smile, something that has already seen difficulty and decided to remain anyway. Amara asked her question again. "How did you stay calm?" And Elaine was quiet for a moment, the way she was quiet when she was being honest rather than instructive. "I don't know that I did," she said finally. "I think I stayed still. Those aren't the same thing." Amara looked at her. "There was a moment," Elaine continued, "around the 3rd hour, when I had gone to the desk again and been turned away again, and I sat back down and I almost thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this isn't what I think it is. Maybe I should just wait quietly and not make trouble." She paused. That thought, that specific thought, that's what they do to us. Not always with cruelty, sometimes without even knowing they're doing it. They make us doubt what we know about our own bodies, our own experience, our own pain. She looked at the photograph on her desk. "My grandmother sat in a room very much like that one, and she doubted herself quiet, and she didn't come home. The office was very still. So I went back to the desk," Elaine said. "Not because I wasn't afraid, because I was. But fear and action are not opposites. Sometimes fear is exactly what gets you up out of the chair. Amara didn't write anything down. She just sat with it. That is the right response to some things. I want to tell you what I think this story is actually about, and then I'm going to stop talking, because some things land harder in silence than in explanation. This is not a story about a doctor who was finally believed because of her credentials, though that happened and it matters, and we should be clear-eyed about what it means. This is a story about what it costs to know something true about yourself and be made to wait for someone else to confirm it. This is a story about the particular endurance required of black women in America, in hospital waiting rooms, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in their own homes, the endurance of being fully present, fully capable, fully certain, and being treated as none of those things. This is a story about a grandmother who didn't make it, and a granddaughter who became a doctor because of it, and a morning 6 decades later when the same room tried to take the same thing and couldn't, because Elaine had learned something Miss Cora never got the chance to teach her directly, but left behind anyway, in the way she held herself, in the way she moved through a world that was not always ready for her. You don't have to be loud to be unmovable. Elaine was not loud in that waiting room. She was not dramatic. She did not perform her pain for anyone's benefit. She went to the desk. She stated what was true. She sat back down. She went again. She stayed in her body and trusted what her body knew, even when the room around her was organized structurally to make her doubt it. That is not a small thing. That is one of the hardest things a person can do. And she did it at 63 years old, with a cardiac event unfolding in her chest, in a plastic chair, alone. There is a photograph on Elaine's desk that is 47 years old. 2 women looking directly at the camera, not smiling exactly, something older than that, something that has already seen the difficulty and decided to remain. Look at the women in your life who carry that expression. The ones who stay when leaving would be easier, the ones who go back to the desk. The ones who built something inside a system that was not built for them, brick by careful brick, because they understood that if they didn't, nobody would. Look at them carefully, because the world does not always stop to look. If this story found something in you, share it. Not because we asked, because someone in your life needs to hear it. 5 people, maybe. The ones you think of first when a story like this lands. Subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below, not just that you liked it, but what it stirred, what memory it touched, what woman it made you think of. That conversation matters to us more than any number. And tell us, what story do you want to hear next? What experience, what moment, what kind of woman do you want to see at the center of the next one? We'll be here. We're not going anywhere.